happy to have you all here. Before we move into the planned content, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So today we are joining and representing the University of British Columbia, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam peoples. And we've completed this work in the Vancouver area, which is also the territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. Thank you. This webinar clearly brings us together from many different places, and we encourage you all to think about the land where you are joining from, its original and current caretakers, and the interactions of your work with those peoples and systems. So there we go, Shauna.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah-Louise. So good morning, everyone. My name is Shauna MacKinnon. I'm the network manager for the British Columbia Agricultural Climate Action Research Network. And it's my pleasure to be co-hosting this session this morning and to be a part of this toolkit launch. So just a little bit about us for those that don't know us. The ACARN Research Network we formed in 2017, and our mission is to foster collaboration among researchers, government, and producers in order to catalyze effective research-backed climate solutions for BC food producers. As a network that's focused on research collaboration, ways to support data sharing has been a frequent topic of conversation, as you can imagine, from things like how to make sure that research data goes back to producers in a way that's useful for them and can help guide their decisions, and how to work together to build data sets that connect the often siloed work of different research projects or research labs. So I'm sure as many of you are aware, as climate change impacts intensify, the need to better understand and track the changes taking place is increasing. And this is particularly relevant in agriculture. So as we're recognizing that farmers need better information to guide their decision-making so that they can respond to what's become highly variable and unpredictable weather conditions, at the same time, we have new opportunities emerging to use big data. Big data is becoming less expensive and more accessible. So there's these opportunities and this need, but what we were finding in our research network is that our conversations around data sharing were often getting stalled out. You know, there was the best intentions, but when it came to figuring out some of the questions around, you know, how could farmers retain ownership and access to research data? How could we make data more transparent and make it visually accessible? And what kind of frameworks would we need or agreements would we need to make sure that we're protecting and respecting the rights of farmers when using their data, and being able to share it back with wider communities? So these questions and this kind of some of these circular conversations led to a collaboration with Drs. Hannah Wittman and Sarah-Louise Ruder at the University of British Columbia, and then with a broader group in this project. These two researchers were already working on these issues and developing best practices through their work with international partners. So that was sort of the background for us in terms of getting involved in this project. And you're going to learn more about the project and then the tools that were developed throughout today's webinar. So just to give you an overview of where we're headed today, we're going to give you a quick introduction to the project and the partners. Then we're going to go over the different assets that are available through the new toolkit. And then we're going to have a chance for Q&A with our presenters and project partners today. We are recording the Zoom and it will be available afterwards. We also, of course, have a Q&A, and so I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Q&A box in Zoom, so you can feel free to type your questions there at any time. You can also upvote others' questions and comment on them. We're offering this event today in English, but the resources are available in additional languages, and we're going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. So I'm going to pass things now on to Dr. Hannah Wittman to tell us a little bit more about the project and the work that they've been doing that led up to this project. So handing it to you, Hannah.
Great, thank you, Shauna, and thank you, Sarah-Louise. I'm here representing the kind of overarching advisory group for this project, and I just want to acknowledge the really hard work that Sarah-Louise and Shauna, and also our lovely students, I see Catalina here on our panel, that have done to kind of bring these resources into fruition. So I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia. I am affiliated with the Center for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm, and we've worked with farmer networks globally for many years on issues related to food sovereignty, data sovereignty, and agroecological transitions. And the question of data extraction, data stewardship, and data visualization, data accessibility for farmers has been really top of mind throughout these collaborations. So in conversing with the BC ACARN network and other friends at OpenTeam, which Anna Lynton is here representing OpenTeam, which is a international US-based network of organizations interested in open agricultural technologies. We've been really trying to build out resources for farmers, farmers associations, and researchers working with those farmers to promote better understanding of questions of data governance, data sovereignty, and data stewardship. So this specific set of resources was funded by a Connections grant. This is the grant out of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the UBC Public Scholars Initiative, which really focuses on engagement and knowledge mobilization. So we want to just acknowledge that what we're presenting to you today isn't just one specific project. It's really the culmination of many relationships that we've had over the years with farmer groups globally, and just trying to kind of put those learnings into conversation with each other and with our future partners as well.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So this has really been, Hannah might be having some connection issues.
Thank you so much. I want to hand it back over to Sarah-Louise.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Hannah. We also want to acknowledge our very large team that have contributed to the project by name. So as Hannah mentioned, this is a collaboration that started with the three of us, but we very quickly assembled a project advisory group that included academics from different universities, including our colleagues in France, as well as folks working in industry with open technologies and the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And this has been essential to making sure that our projects are relevant and could be useful to these various groups and perspectives. We also had a team of excellent project assistants, Catalina, Asha, and Delaney. We hired an illustrator who works for Drawing Change, Anna Lee. The drawings that you're seeing on the slide are all hers. We had a large team for language translation, and then Anna is here representing OpenTeam, but we've also worked closely with Dorn Cox, Nat Irwin, and the Tech Working Group. So Anna, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and OpenTeam?
Hi all, my name is Anna Lynton and I work on the collaborative projects team at OpenTeam. OpenTeam stands for Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management, and it is a community-led effort that's facilitated by Wolfsneck Center for Agriculture and the Environment, which is based in Maine here in the US. Our really broad mission of the OpenTeam community is to create an open source interoperable tech ecosystem that enables farmer control of data, knowledge sharing, and access to programs and marketplace incentives. Our community is made up with a wide variety of stakeholders, including land-based organizations, agricultural technology providers and developers, individual producers, food companies, and government agencies. So through this tech working group that Sarah-Louise described last year, our community collaboratively designed a set of documents to work towards a system of farmer-controlled agricultural data. This group pulled together participants from our community to co-design and provide feedback on a few of the documents that are a part of the toolkit that we're going to be sharing today.
Great, thank you so much. So now it's time to talk about our toolkit. It is very exciting to be able to share these resources out to you today. What we've called the Toolkit for Ethical Data Governance in Agriculture is a free open access set of resources that you may use and adapt for your purposes. And they are based on years of community engaged research and the work happening at these three organizations that we've just described. The work is under a Creative Commons license that asks you to please attribute the source, to use it for non-commercial purposes, and then to license any future work with those same agreements and permissions. So now we'll go one by one through the resources. First up, we have an infographic. This is a smaller image. We will make it larger for you, and it is available on the website for you to download and take time to digest. This is designed to share the product of research that was conducted at the University of British Columbia and was informed by a lot of the work that's happening through this connection grant. So we ran a series of 14 workshops with farmers and others working with farmers and agricultural data, and attended about 30 conferences where folks were talking about these topics from various perspectives. And then this is the findings of our work. So the main challenges that we identified that are important to farmers and others working on the ground in terms of agricultural data governance, the potential best practices that are often promoted to address those challenges, and then the potential for a data justice informed approach to agricultural data governance. So we'll give you a moment here to show you the beautiful art that Anna Lee created for us. Because we have a lot packed into that graphic, we've also created an explainer video. Both of these, the infographic and the video, are available in English and French, and they explain the different portions of the illustration, provide examples, and will point to places to learn more. Next, we ran a workshop series last spring where many members of our advisory groups and beyond came to talk about their expertise and experience with agricultural data, data policy, and work like OpenTeam is described. So we had folks from OpenTeam, but grassroots, farmer-led approaches to data governance and technologies. And so for those who couldn't attend, we've recorded the sessions and summarized them in this report with a list of all the questions that were asked and all the resources that were provided by the speakers and through the conversations that we had. This is also available in English and French. The workshops that we ran that informed that infographic in our research had a template of facilitation guide. And so the next thing we did is we revised the template to make it more broadly usable for a diversity of audiences. We included some suggestions of activities that we used to walk through these topics. But the intention is that you can use this this resource as is, or build upon it to lead your own meetings and conversations. We're hoping that this would be relevant to a larger group of folks internationally, and also just different language speakers in British Columbia for representing farmers and farm workers in the province. So we've translated this document into English, or into French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Punjabi. And there are 2 more languages in the process that were requested through our international partners, German and Malayalam. So we'll be very excited to add those in the spring, but these 5 are already available to you on the website. As an example of one of the exercises that are included, we talk you through a how might we exercise, where we can transform practical problems that you might be facing into a brainstorming activity that could lead to different solutions. So there's an example here on the slide. Next is the first of our resources that we developed with OpenTeam. This is something I've been very passionate about over the past year or 2. We use a lot of these terms without necessarily defining them, or acknowledging that many people are defining them in different ways. So what do we mean by data, or agricultural data, or data governance? So we started collecting a list of terms for our own work and organization and research at UBC. And there was a very similar interest at OpenTeam and the tech working group. So we worked together in that collaborative project to make a list of terms that included a short 1 or 2 sentence definition. There's an example here on the slide. It's small, but you'll be able to download and look through it more closely. Then we'll also offer additional or other definitions that might add more nuance or that come from official sources, and an agricultural example that helps bring this potentially theoretical concept to the ground in a more tangible way. And we link to related terms. And so if there are terms used in the definition that are also included in the glossary, we'll tell you what they are and where to find them. Here's another example of our definition of data governance. This one's a little bit longer because it was quite complex. So I think it is still one sentence, but we've really stretched that with the use of punctuation. So there's a lot in this definition, but we've also included different organizations that define in similar or different ways. And then we link where relevant to our other resources. And so data governance is the topic of this glossary. And so if someone were to come across the discussion guide, if someone were to come across the glossary and interested to learning more, they can then go to the discussion guide. Okay, now to you, Anna.
Great. The next document that we included is the Oath of Care. This is another document that we worked on in OpenTeam's technology working group, and now it's being shared more widely. The Oath of Care is a trust building document between individuals in advisory roles with producers. It's meant to act as sort of a social contract that establishes good faith activity when it comes to advising data collection practices. So the intention is that it is used by technical service and assistance providers and individuals in roles with farmers, ranchers, and land stewards. And you can go to the next slide. This next document that we worked on is called the Bill of Rights, and it is a set of rights that our working group proposed to ensure that land stewards have these rights in terms to their data within primarily the OpenTeam technology ecosystem, but then applying it more widely to what rights should producers have when it comes to their data. We want the responsibility for upholding these rights to lie with members in our community that are creating technology and uphold these rights on behalf of land stewards and work to implement mechanisms for producers to have control over the technologies. We hope that it sort of serves as like a roadmap for anyone that's creating technology in this space to ensure that producers continue to have control. And you can go to the next slide. Finally, this is the data hosting and storage agreement. So it's sort of a boilerplate policy for organizations who develop or maintain technology platforms that store or host private, personal, or agricultural data. So this is more of like a fill in the blank kind of document. It defines the standards for hosting, storing, and securing producer data as a means for upholding their data privacy and security that we expect in our community, and then what we are proposing as sort of a best practice in this space. So we expect that all of our partners who host or store agricultural data to adopt this agreement. And with all of these documents, we are accepting feedback and continuing to look into what other cases that they can be used in. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Anna. Okay, so once again, we want to thank the very many people who have contributed to these resources and have made their dissemination possible. Thank you to our illustrator, the language translator, our advisory group, our project assistants, collaborators, and the funders that find value in this kind of work, bridging public and civil society, nonprofit organizations and goals with academic research. And now we turn it over to you. We'd love to hear your questions. If you have suggestions or requests about our work and the toolkit and how it can be used, now's the time. So we're looking forward to having a discussion.
Great. Thank you so much to all three of you for giving that overview of the project and the resources in the toolkit. So we do have some questions coming into the chat and the Q&A. So for people with questions, can you please type them into the Q&A? Just a little bit easier for us to track them there. And as I mentioned, you can also upvote questions or add comments as well. So let's get started. Okay, well, a first question that came up in the chat, and I'll just start with that one, was whether or not the toolkit could be used in international presentations or if a copyright approval would be required. So Sarah-Louise, I'll send that one to you.
Yes, we would love for the documents to have a life of their own and to be used in whatever way would be relevant to your organizations. And so we've decided to put a Creative Commons license on these documents. That just means that we've expressed that we would like to be attributed if you download and modify the documents, or if you want to use and present them as they are, to attribute their source, and then to also not use the resources for a commercial purpose. And if you are to iterate upon the documents or change parts of them, that you use the same Creative Commons license. And so your future outputs could also not be used for a commercial purpose. But yes, please use them in whatever organization you think would be relevant and helpful.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I just want to reiterate, we definitely want to see people using these and sharing them widely. A question, I'll take this one. So someone was already on the webpage today looking for some of those toolkit documents, and they noticed that there were a few things that weren't live. It's true, this recording will be going up there. It's not live yet. And also a few of the multilingual resources are just being uploaded right now. So those things will be coming by the end of the day, most likely. But as mentioned, the German and Malayan language resources will be coming in the coming weeks. Yes, and there's a question there about where we can download the content, and we could just share in the chat the link to the webpage where that is available. Another one that I'm going to send to you, Sarah-Louise, is if there are plans to develop guidance for data sharing agreements.
Yes, that's definitely of interest. One of the projects at OpenTeam, the data hosting and storage agreement, was precisely that. So I'll let Anna talk about that briefly, but in terms of understanding thanks for putting the links in the chat, understanding the terms and conditions of policies to which we are subject, or potential data rights that we might have access to in our jurisdiction. That's one of the intentions of the glossary. And so we've produced definitions and agricultural example of the various terms and concepts that are often used in those policies. So that can help for understanding, hopefully can help for understanding policies, and then also for developing policies of your own. And the Oath of Care and Bill of Rights documents can also be helpful as an orienting principle for data governance. So do you want to add anything to that, Anna?
I think in addition to that, I'll just add that OpenTeam plans to develop guides and use cases for each of these documents that I think would also add to what Sarah-Louise is saying, of like being able to look at these documents and then have sort of a supporting document that explains the best way to use it and how to apply it to your use case and what other information you might need. So look for that coming up.
Great. I know there's a lot of interest around more guidance on those topics. Another area for further work, but also this is something that has been part of the project. We have a couple of questions around Indigenous engagement. So one of the questions is around how Indigenous communities were engaged in this, and how there could be further engagement through the toolkit. And then also a question around translation to Indigenous languages and resources specifically for engaging with Indigenous agri-food producers. So again, Sarah-Louise, I'm going to go to you on this because that was something that was in the first part of the project.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is absolutely a vital part of data governance in agriculture, and just thinking about the governance of agricultural systems in general. So in our workshop series from last spring, one of our projects looked at Indigenous data governance and working beyond the OCAP principles for Indigenous or First Nations information governance. And so we had a conversation about this and we were very lucky to have Tabitha Robin Martins and Robin Rowe join us to talk about their work in Indigenous self-determination and self-sovereignty as in food systems as well as in data systems. We, beyond that, wanted to focus on the relationships that we already had and had cultivated trust with and through our organizations. And so the various other documents did have some input from a variety of groups, including Indigenous peoples, but we didn't necessarily tailor those to those perspectives in particular. And then I saw, oh yes, Hannah.
I just was going to say that there's also a very strong set of resources around Indigenous data governance and Indigenous data sovereignty organized by Indigenous organizations and support networks themselves. And so I would refer folks to the First Nations Information Governance Center, which runs courses and trainings on ownership, control, access, and possession. So the OCAP principles, and they offer resources for Indigenous communities to develop their own state data stewardship agreements as well. And we didn't want to replicate that work. We want to refer people to the work that's already happening in that area.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. I'm putting in the chat the link to the CARE principles as well, which were developed by the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. And they are described and discussed in both our glossary and discussion guide. And then we'll also put the FNGC, the OCAP organization, and where you can find training on those principles. But yeah, thank you very much for bringing up for that question.
Yeah, and I think to Hannah's point of not replicating that work, I would say that in many ways, Indigenous communities have been leading this movement for community-based control of data, and that really is a great place to start if you're looking about, just trying to get your head around what that could look like and why it's important. Looking at the work that Indigenous communities have been doing in Canada and other parts of the world is a great place to start. There's so much to be learned from their leadership in this space. So great to dig more into those resources. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
On the point on translation, I was just going to say, for the point on translation, because these are Creative Commons licensed, anybody that would like to translate the documents into their own languages is super welcome. We would love it if people that are translating them verbatim, if they wanted to share back with us the translated versions, we'd be happy to post them in our collection of the multiple language translations.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, Hannah, that we are hoping for these to be living documents, and for OpenTeam as well, their documents are living documents that are being continuously updated. So as people are looking at these resources and applying them in their own ways, if you are adapting them to your own context or translating them into further languages, it would be great to share those back and basically, further build out these resources. And the more information there is on our case studies or examples of this being used in different contexts, I think it becomes even more useful for others because there's so much learning that could go on from how different people are applying these. I do want to ask a question that came up in the Q&A around, is there a database contract tool in this system? I think this is a question that is, maybe a little bit beyond the scope of this project, but Anna, maybe I would pass this to you in terms of something that OpenTeam might be thinking about, a database contract tool or something along those lines.
Yeah, I am not sure if I fully understand the intent of this question, so maybe if the asker could provide some more context.
Yeah, as we wait, could you also talk about the versioning and feedback process at OpenTeam? I put the link in the chat to that website. So maybe you can elaborate.
I'd be happy to. Thank you for dropping that link, Sarah-Louise. So in addition to the Toolkit resource that is hosted by this group, OpenTeam has hosted these documents on our own page. And under each document, we have a feedback form, and we're hoping to continue to iterate on these documents. The feedback page for each document includes sort of a versioning log. So an explanation of how that document came to be and any updates that we've created in the past. We are already on version 2 of the Oath of Care. And then we have some options for providing feedback. We have a discussion on Hilo, which is sort of a social platform, and you can add comments there. We also have a link to a Google Doc where you could comment on specific lines or ask specific questions, or you can contact us directly, and we're always welcome to have a discussion about that. And in the future, we're working on sort of a governance process so that these documents can sort of be owned by the community instead of a few individuals at OpenTeam. And the versioning process would be such that there's a group from our community that is really excited about a certain document. They can collect feedback from the community and propose changes to figure out what needs to happen next on those documents. So very much living documents, and we're excited to see how these documents can go out into the world and what we can learn from that to improve them.
Thanks, Anna. And that does answer a question that came up in the chat around the living versions and whether these are static or not. And definitely in this quick changing world, having living documents makes so much sense. Okay, I'm going to loop back now to the question around contracting and basically how to set up smart contracts for data sharing, contract templates. So I'm going to hand that one to Hannah Wittman.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that we're not offering contract templates. The point of an agricultural data governance and ethical data governance in particular is to really make sure that those agreements that might be made between agricultural service providers, farmers, researchers, indigenous communities, and community members are really based on a mutual set of understanding and agreement about the core principles of data governance. So data access, data ownership, data stewardship, privacy, confidentiality. And so and about these concepts to actually be more informed about what they're agreeing to, and also ask the right sets of questions to people who are asking for their data.
Thanks, Hannah. That's really useful context about the approach and how do you move from from a template to something that is actually more about the agreement and community agreement and sort of the negotiation and conversation that has to take place there. So thank you so much for that answer. A question around OCAP principles. So I'm going to just read this one, and you guys can just raise your hand in terms of speakers who wants to take answering this first. The OCAP principles are very much focused on health data, while data pertaining to land stewardship, biocultural reserves, climate change mitigation, etc., are coming into the focus of Indigenous governance now. What do you see as the barriers and enablers to Indigenous peoples accessing, assessing, and adapting and governing technologies for these purposes, focused on land stewardship and climate change?
Hannah, would you like to go first? Or
sure. I think that I think it may be true that the management of health data is what really might have spurred some of the initial questions about Indigenous data sovereignty around health records, but I see the OCAP principles being used and discussed by Indigenous communities very much around their land data. So hunting, harvesting, sort of cultural, medicinal knowledge, understanding the context specificity of that knowledge, and the very complex intergenerational protocols about how that data can be shared. So there's a number of groups supporting Indigenous communities specifically on these principles. I would refer people to the group Digital Democracy, who are working a lot on land stewardship data under the principles of digital data sovereignty. Yeah, I think that these are questions, again, that are very context specific. And what we're trying to do is offer a set of questions that can be used in discussion in specific projects so that those agreements can be made really through the actualization of informed consent between all parties around these data. So I don't know if you want to add something to that, Sarah-Louise or Anna. But I think, again, a one-size-fits-all template is not going to work out for most of these communities working on these really challenging and important issues.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, for your question, Angela, I think we got into some of the details and tensions during our webinar session last spring, which we summarize and describe in the workshop summary report. But in terms of some of the challenges, I think there are different definitions of what counts as data or what counts as Indigenous data. And according to Indigenous groups and these leaders in the movements as well, like the OCAP principles that provide training and the Global Indigenous Data Alliance, the definition of Indigenous data is very broad. And so that could include things that others might not be recognizing as Indigenous data. And these principles might help expand the horizons of other settler organizations or other community-based organizations that are looking to, yes, Hannah, that are looking to build or use that as tools to advocate for themselves and assert their own self-determination and sovereignty. So the definitions, I think, are one of the barriers or the way that we define and scope these various concepts. But that could also be an enabler in terms of having these conversations. And so it's been really great to be in these farming contexts or agricultural technology contexts and having conversations about the OCAP principles and the CARE principles. One other thing I'll mention is that there are tensions between the movements towards opening access to data with the intent that agricultural data could be used and by a variety of groups openly, freely for their own purposes. And that can be helpful to address some of the imbalances in power in terms of usefulness or use and profit from data, for example. But that there's a bit of a tension there because some data should definitely not be open. There are some sensitive pieces of information that should be protected or permissioned only for specific purposes and actors with whom to share. And that decision really comes down to the Indigenous individuals and organizations to decide what is appropriate to be open and what is appropriate to be shared and protected. And so that's another place where I see both you had said some barriers and enablers. This open access movement could be both a barrier and an enabler depending on the context. And so these are complex questions to think about, and we're hoping that our resources help other organizations have some of those questions and come to their own conclusions. Oh.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah-Louise, and Hannah for your answers there. Angela, if you want to unmute yourself and follow up at all, you're welcome to do that now. I'll just pause here to see if you want to take that opportunity. Okay, well, feel free to. Did you say okay or
no?
You're okay?
I'm good, actually. No, that was great. The answer was fine. Thank you so much.
Okay, great, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question and for joining us, Angela.
So we just have a couple of questions remaining that I'd like to get to. So one is just around standards and sort of the background standards that these resources are built off of, and Sarah-Louise or Hannah, maybe you want to take this, just talking more about the regulatory structure that we're under and how that plays into these more iterative community-based types of agreement processes.
This applies also to the work we did with OpenTeam and the glossary, but we looked at a variety of different principles that others had already proposed. So we've mentioned the CARE principles, the OCAP principles. There are also the FAIR principles for information governance and data management that are looking to make data findable, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So we reviewed the variety of guiding principles, voluntary codes of conduct, including Ag Data Transparent as a sector relevant voluntary code of conduct. And then we also looked at policies. So we reviewed the Canadian data policies, the Privacy Act, and the Personal Information Protection PIPEDA. And then, of course, the policies in the European Union with the help of our colleagues on the advisory group in France, but have also been used and kind of pointed to as a gold standard beyond the European Union. So that would be the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. And within the GDPR, there are articulations very specifically about different data rights, including the right to access, the right to be forgotten, and so on and so forth. And so through that review is where we developed a lot of the terms that ended up in the glossary, and a lot of the guiding principles or values that went into the other OpenTeam documents, like the Bill of Rights or the Oath of Care. Anna, would you like to add anything to that?
I think that perfectly summarizes sort of the foundational documents that we looked at. And I think I'll just add that from our standpoint, we're thinking about how these things are sort of building blocks within local contexts, and that sort of every situation is different. And again, like, these documents are meant to be changed for particular contexts, including particular regulations.
Great, thank you for that. There is a question in the chat around quality assurance. So just changing gears a little bit, I think this is one of the key questions that often comes up when we're talking about collecting data, especially at a community level or more a citizen science-based approach. So how do we assure, and that's the kind of the royal we there, how do we assure monitoring and data validations are true without oligopolies or very large entities manipulating results, and is that part of the scope of this project, or how is that being addressed? Have you seen that be addressed in groups you're working with?
That's a really interesting question. It wasn't part of the resources that we have in the toolkit, but these are definitely kinds of discussions that we've been having in some of the community-based work and our engagement at conferences. So in terms of data validation, we've seen a few very interesting grassroots approaches to this. And so, the farm worker wallet, we recently learned about. Hannah and I were at a conference earlier this week from an organization called Entidad, and they are in the US. And for their data validation, they created an open source tool for farm workers to apply for different programs of government assistance. And through their affiliation with the Farm Workers Union in the US and other nonprofit or non-governmental organizations, the farm worker could upload their information and documents, including a photo of their identification, which was essential for applying to these programs. And then one of the trusted affiliates in that organization, including the Farm Workers Union, would be able to see that and then validate the documents. And they had enabled also a chat function and a video function within their trusted advocates. And so that relationship where they could see the face of the person that's working with them to validate their document was really helpful and has been successful. They've had over 100,000 farm workers get access to that, to their funding, the program for COVID, to have funds for any funds or expenses they incurred. Sorry, mixed up the order of the words. So that was really interesting in terms of data validation in a way that was really built on trust. Agricultural data validation, I've seen a few other or decentralized kind of data validation that doesn't require this oligopoly. I've seen a few great examples at OpenTeam. Greg Ostick was one of the speakers on our workshop series, and he discussed a tool that he developed, data dashboarding and visualization tool, so that farmers could compare their yields or other elements of their operation with other farms that are farming similar things in similar climates, to see kind of benchmarking where they were performing and where there might be opportunity to improve or best management practices. So I'd recommend you take a look at that recording. It was a really engaging conversation. And Greg Ostick also was in the tech working group at OpenTeam that informed a lot of these documents. Anything to add on that, Hannah or Anna, either?
Excellent. That was a really great answer, Sarah-Louise, and really loved the examples that you provided. A similar, I think, common question that comes up when we're talking about data governance is around the ownership of data when it's a corporate entity that is collecting the data. So we have a question around, what is the policy framework around data that's generated through ag precision technologies? Who owns that data? Is it the farmers or the ag tech corporations? Sarah-Louise, I feel like this is a question that you love to answer, but Anna, I'm sure you also have provided this answer many times. So Sarah-Louise, maybe do you want to start, and then Anna or Hannah, if you want to chime in, that'd be great.
I feel like I've been speaking a lot. So Anna, why don't you go first, and then I can. This is something I've thought a lot about, so happy to add to it after.
Sure. Sorry, I lost the question here.
Oh, if that's okay, then I can go first. But
Go ahead.
At the bottom of our Q&A list. So this was precisely one of the topics of a study in my dissertation research that I conducted with Hannah, and that informed this work. And so it is very interesting and important to think about the ownership of the data, but something we discussed in our research outputs, but also in the video and infographic in this toolkit, is that ownership does not always guarantee control of the data in the ways that it's articulated in many of the privacy policies and terms of conditions for common tools, including like farm management platforms or apps. And so that is absolutely an important question to ask. Often the true ownership, if you think about ownership in terms of can you control what happens? Can you benefit from its uses? That is not often with the farmers in many of these corporate tools or versions of farm management platforms. So that often is the case embedded in the precision agricultural technologies that are harder and harder to avoid when buying new machinery on farms. And so for those who are not as familiar, buying a new tractor, for example, can include the integration of sensors and different means of data collection, but also platforms for analyzing that data and then being given recommendations or suggestions of what you should do on your farm. And it's very hard for farmers to opt out from those things. And sometimes by buying those tools, they're immediately signed into a farm management platform or app that they get through that machinery, and then also through various other handheld devices or their computers. And so in those contexts, it is very often the ag tech corporations, as you identified, that own the data, or even if there is data ownership afforded to the farm user or the user of the platform or the farmer, it is only for a very specific subset of the data, and it does not guarantee that they have control over how it's used. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, you can take a look at the video in the toolkit. I do discuss that a little bit more. My dissertation is open access. I've talked for many, many pages about this. And so, yeah, feel free to get in touch if you want to chat more about that. Oh, and then the farmer ownership is central. Farmer data ownership and control is central to many other options. There's not only the corporate options for farm management platforms. You can take a look at OpenTeam's website to see there are very many partners and I can't remember what you call the other organizations that you celebrate and support, but FarmOS, for example, and Light Farm are platforms where the farmers have full control over their data, and yeah, they have other great principles of open source and so forth. So that's not the only way forward.
Yeah, I agree with that answer. I really like that sentence. It's not the only way forward. I think in OpenTeam's work, we're trying to find alternatives to these larger ag tech corporations through the open source technologies that Sarah-Louise has provided. And again, like we want these documents to sort of be a basis for a sort of different future or different alternative where farmers do control their data. And I think this point of what is ownership, who owns things, who controls it, is like part of what made writing something like the glossary so difficult, because it is such like a complex topic and you can't just easily pin who owns what in something that's sort of unprecedented. So thank you for that answer, Sarah-Louise.
Great. And so I think I want to just wrap up things here on the note of what's next. So we have, through our conversations, already mentioned the request for feedback on the toolkit resources, the revisioning process that will be ongoing with the resources that OpenTeam is stewarding. But for each of you, would you like to just give a quick note on what you see as next, or ongoing work you have that's related to this? And Hannah, maybe we'll start with you, then go to Anna, and then close with Sarah-Louise.
Yeah, thanks everyone. As far as I'm concerned, we have ongoing research on farmer-led and farmer-initiated questions around both sustainable agricultural transitions and ethical data governance, data justice. So, we're really going to dig into these resources and revisit them in each project. And so I really do encourage people to try them in your project, change them to meet your purposes and context. And then if you have time, let us know how it's going, because I really do think that these are questions that a lot of community groups, farmers associations have, and the more diversity of experience that we can share with each other, I think the more prepared we're going to be to confront the potential challenges of the corporate control over our personal and agricultural data.
And yeah, I'll second everything Hannah said about wanting to understand the use cases for these documents, and if you're using them if you have the time to provide us feedback on how we can change anything. I think on the OpenTeam side, we're looking forward to creating sort of a governance structure around these documents so that it's owned by the community on our side, and also to develop supporting documents that really answer some of these questions around how do I use this in my local context and what should I consider. And I think along with that, having use cases and examples from people that have actually done that would be really beneficial. And we would be thrilled to work with anyone to kind of figure out how to do that in their use case. So just looking forward to continuing to grow these documents.
Great, that's a great invitation for collaboration and support. Thank you, Anna. So Louise, do you want to have any closing thoughts just on what's next?
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining to hear about the work that we've been doing, and hopefully this is just the beginning of the life of these documents. And so I am still affiliated as a researcher at the University of British Columbia, but I've also now started working with Kelly Bronson as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Ottawa. And these are precisely the questions we're going to continue to dig into, as Hannah mentioned, from an academic perspective, but we're also committed to revise these outputs, produce more depending on our community-based organization engagement. And yeah, these are questions that we've definitely been thinking about. So John, Jida, we have a couple other questions that we haven't finished, but I encourage you, please get in touch. I'd love to talk more. we can all learn from each other. So thank you all so much for joining. We look forward to hearing your thoughts. There'll be a feedback form for the event, but also if you have recommendations of how these can be improved upon or ways that you'd like to collaborate, yeah, it's an open invitation. So thank you.
Great. So I'm just going to wrap up with the final round of thank yous. Thank you to everyone for joining us today live. And for those that also will be watching the recording, the questions in the Q&A in the chat were really excellent and helped us kind of dig deeper into these into the resources. So thank you for that. I also want to say another huge thank you to our advisory committee who've been working with us for the last about 1.5 years on this project, and to our collaborators like OpenTeam and INRAE in France, who have been really helpful in helping draw out the international context. You can find all the materials on the ACARN website, which is where the project page is for this, and that has been shared in the chat a couple of times. All of those resources will be up there within the hour. So please check in there. And as Sarah-Louise mentioned, as soon as you log off, you're going to be directed to a feedback survey on this session. Please take 2 minutes to do that. We really appreciate it. We do actually take your feedback and put that into play when we're planning future events and projects. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks to our speakers, and enjoy the rest of your day.